Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Ryan Dawson back on the show. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm good. I always like coming on this program.
Well, thanks for coming on. Of course, you are the host of the ANC Report.
Part 2 of an interview with Ryan Dawson on Michael Flynn, Israelgate and war profiteers.
I can tell you, and anyone around LA, I guess, knows about the casting couch and just how prominent. It's shocking when it doesn't happen, you know. They're disgusting, and they're abusing power, and there's a lot of girls who willingly will, like, all right, I'll sell it to get this position, you know.
It is a transaction element to it,
yeah. I mean, it's as bad on one side as the other. I mean, they're definitely victims of molestation, rape, and child actors and all. And there's also a lot of girls that get ahead of other women by sleeping with the boss. Plenty of that.
Yeah, everyone talks about sexual harassment, what laws should exist, whatever. My take the view is no one has a right to be an actress or an actor, and they should just not get involved in the industry because you have to sell your soul. You have to be morally responsible for your own decisions that you take. You tell them to go to hell. I'll find honest work. But they want to be celebrities, and for that you sell your soul. But if it's wrong to use your power to ask for sexual favors from a young girl or young man, is it wrong to sell those favors? I say it's just as wrong.
It is. You're getting advantage over others by doing it.
Yeah.
But it's starting to come apart with Weinstein, and some of them are, you know, it's something that's been festering for a long time. And what's the guy? His last name is Crew, Terry Crew. He's in the NFL. Anyway, he's come out talking about his story, and he was saying it's like the Emancipation Proclamation, like all these people getting caught and finally being held accountable, because that's been going on for a very, very long time, all the way back to, you know, even the 30s and 40s.
Oh yeah,
you know, complaining, like, I don't want to have to kiss the producer every morning and all this stuff. And
yeah, Kenneth Anger's book about Hollywood Babylon is about like Fatty Arbuckle in the 20s, the silent era.
You heard Marilyn Monroe say, I'll never have to suck a cock again. Like, they, you know.
Yeah, it's sad.
Looking back at these people, it's what they had to do for stardom. And some of them didn't do it for stardom. They just got it just, you know.
Yeah.
They got raped. But these people have billions or millions. And what are you going to do about it? It's really hard to fight people with that much money with the court system and all. It doesn't really work for the poor.
Yeah, because they can just shut it down in endless litigation.
Matt Lauer is coming down now, and you look back at some of those segments. Ugh, what a creepy dude! You know.
Well, it's just these people are just the egomaniacs, and it's the cult of celebrity, and they lose any base of reality, and in themselves they're dehumanized because they no longer. I mean, what they must think of themselves.
Also the power network preys on the compromised, because when you have someone compromised, you got control. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether it's McGreevy or Charles Haster or whatever, they're handlers who know about, you know, whatever their vice is, whether it's closet homosexuality, which is losing its power as homosexuality gets more accepted. Mm-hmm. That old moinker, you know, the Hoover could never, you know, that's losing its grip. So pedophilia is what the new generation that they push are like people who are into kiddie porn and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it gets worse.
That's
taboo,
and so
you get
now you're getting
sick of people in power.
Really nasty people in.
Yeah, that's great. I can see Hoover, you know, if he were exposed as a homosexual way back when, and maybe he had been in the current climate, and he would have come out and said, "Yes, I'm the FBI director, and I'm gay. I'm a gay man." And a cross-dresser. But don't pay attention to the fact that...
and he had a foot fetish.
Yeah, but he would say, don't pay attention that I go to, like, mob...
Apparently he's quite fond of women's shoes, too.
Yeah. But he would say, don't pay attention to the fact that I ignore the existence of organized crime, and I frequented a mafia-owned racetrack where I won races all the time.
And I get free hotel passes at mafia-owned hotels.
Yeah, but I'm a gay
man.
Where
I conduct these activities.
So, but
It goes back to Henry Crown and the Shine family and all that. I mean, I kind of hinted at that in the Trump film I made. I was like, do I really want to like explain RFK? But I just want to leave some breadcrumbs, for people. And but you did the start of the movie, but
you did earlier. We mentioned that talk you did in Sydney back in December. You posted in February.
That was with Mimi Alahim, sort of like. She did a half hour of the 3 hours. Mm-hmm. But she was finishing hers like that day. So I was like, all right, I'll handle it. I always have a lot to talk about. And I wanted to explain to them, we wanted to talk about Syria, of course, but I felt like we gotta explain Afghanistan some first. And pipeline politics and drugs. Because then it'll all become very clear. And, so that's sort of what the talk basically was explaining, that, look, we are not in the Middle East for oil or petrodollars or any of the kind of leftist nonsense that you hear. Like Syria especially can't be about oil. They're never a major oil exporter. I mean, you're talking about in the tens of thousands versus the millions in Iraq, right? Mm-hmm. For it is very clear that we don't have any oil interests in Syria. And there's no dollar, that doesn't matter. But they're for Israeli interests. And, you can clearly see that with the Iraq War and the OSP and all the origins of all the lies that got us into Iraq came from a bunch of Jewish partisans for Israel. And Syria, you were following the Oded Yanan script to the T. And if you don't know about Oded Yanan, then Syria might be confusing, because if you take the government narrative of like Arab Springs that happened out of nowhere, and then for some reason after 11 years of peace, Assad would decide to have snipers shoot at protesters and start this huge uprising, which suddenly already had all these members, guns, and money, then you would be like, what's going on in Syria? Who's fighting who? But if you do understand the Israeli side of things, nothing's confusing at all. Because you know what their agenda is, because they literally wrote it down with Oded Yanan, and then after that, the clean break strategy, which was just kind of an update on the older papers.
Mm-hmm. Oded Yanan plans, that's 1982 about, and then the clean break's the 90s, correct?
It's about 1982, and they were they wanted to happen in Syria what had already happened in Lebanon, because they refer to that in the paper. And what they're talking about is, from 1975 onward, it never really had a clear ending. I guess maybe 1990 or so, Lebanon was in a massive civil war between all these different ethnic factions, Christians and Hezbollah and different Sunni and Shia groups. That's what they wanted to happen in Syria. And they wrote it down. And they wanted to kick that off in Iraq. And they said, because Iraq is a lot stronger than Syria, that they're going to have to take out Iraq first. Because that's Israel's greatest enemy. And so Iraq and Iran were horn to horn in the middle of a war. So they said, that's going to weaken both of them. And so we can focus on Syria. And here's what we can do. And they laid out exactly what was done during the Syrian war to bring it, Kurds in and you read it, and it's from 1982, but it could have been written yesterday. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Iraq War, and Cheney laid this out in 94, and it's weird watching Dick Cheney say, we couldn't go in and kill Saddam, it created a quagmire, and parts of Iraq could fly off and threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey. You have a Kurdish region in the north, and the Shia and the Sunni in the south. I mean, he just verbatim said exactly what they knew would happen. And then 2003, they did it anyway, and it broke down just like they thought. This stuff wasn't blowback. It's planned. They wanted chaos. They wanted sectarian violence. That's the point. Is to destroy all these Arab nations from within. They bragged about it. They said every Arab on Arab death is good for Israel. At the same time, they flood Europe with refugees. I mean, everything's detailed in these plans. And And, some good Israelis translated it from Hebrew to English. And the problem is you just can't get people to read it.
Yeah. People don't read, as Dulles said, right? Americans don't read. Alan Dulles supposedly said that.
Not enough of them read, yeah. I mean, the ones who do tend to read a lot, but then there's others that haven't read a book since they were forced to do it in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sad.
But it's interesting because when Cheney says that in 1994, talking about the policies or the goals of the first Gulf War under Bush, George H.W. Bush, is for all the problems of that administration, the Bush family he didn't seem to be quite on board the Zionist project as maybe his successor, Bill Clinton. Of course,
yeah, no, Bush Sr. is very much a Saudi guy, and not that that's any better.
No, yeah.
He was against settlements.
Yes,
and this is why he didn't get reelected.
Mm-hmm.
But he was definitely, I mean, he created the Safari Club. I mean, he brought the Saudi ring of influence in to join the syndicate that already existed with Israel and the United States that have been there since James Jesus Angleton. I always call him James Jesus Angleton because that's funny, but it's Jesus. But, which was the CIA counterintelligence director. His underlings, all of them are might as well have just been Mossad. So close. Ed Shackley is another guy like that. So Bush Sr. actually did, relative to other presidents, oppose some Israeli interests, or at least hit the handbrake, saying you cannot have Jerusalem for your capital. No, and these settlements are an international disaster, and you're screwing things up. So he was gone, and his son, of course, completely is a total puppet of Israel.
Yeah, he was completely taken. Yeah,
he let the neocons that his father called the crazies in the basement. Mm-hmm. He gave them all the top positions in the Pentagon, and the neocons. That's why we had a war in Iraq. Really, I mean, Doug Feith, Richard Pearl, Louis Leibowitz, and Fromm, Abrams, all these guys, Wormser. Those guys had been sort of relegated to play with Central America during Bush Sr.'s term. Which is like a not important. and we saw how bad things were in Central America in the 80s.
Of course, Bush Sr.'s term was
with Israel. That's all third countries.
Bush Sr.'s term was really 1981 through 1993.
Yeah, kind of.
After the assassination, it seemed to have been the message sent, the assassination attempt, and of course, who's really running the National Security Council?
Well, you know about the dinner with Hinckley's people.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Hinckley, the would-be assassin of Ronald Reagan, was a member of a family that was very close to the Bush family. Business partners. They had problems with the Justice Department and some antitrust regulation. I think they were involved in some pricing fixing, or they had violated some pricing issues. Regardless, they were being investigated by the federal government. But the Hinckley family were business partners with the Bush family, and the older brother of John Hinckley, the would-be assassin of Ronald Reagan, was going to have dinner with Neil Bush the day after the assassination. And that was reported twice, I think in a Houston newspaper and CBS Evening News or something.
Neil, by the way, is the same one that got caught with the prostitutes in Thailand.
Yes.
He's one of the lesser criminals of, compared to the other Bushes.
Of course, that factors in the whole Silverado thing and the saving of loans collapse, which takes us back to Iran-Contra and these things. And potentially the Franklin scandal and pedophile ring running out of Boys Town.
That Larry King thing gets a lot of attention, but I tell people that scandal is famous because it got out on YouTube or whatever. Mm-hmm. But really, that was minor league compared to the real pedophile rings. It's kind of like the Bilderberg group. Around 2005 or 6, the Bilderberg group suddenly gets all this attention, just like the Carlyle equity firm, because it was in a Michael Moore movie and he talked about Carlyle. I'm Carlyle's pretty low on the list as far as the equity firms of influence, and Bilderberg's like on the very bottom. I mean, AIPAC is the most influential lobby, hands down, think tank, everything. They get everything they want.
Yeah.
But it's the Franklin cover up is disgusting and all, but really there were much bigger and darker pedophile rings.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just become sort of, like we said before, an open part of the job style business in Hollywood. There's the whole professional industries are involved in it.
There's a documentary called An Open Secret about Hollywood and pedophilia. It's kind of an open secret. People know it.
Not.
Yeah, and it's the Amy Berg did it. She did a well-received one about the scandals in the Catholic Church. So, then she doesn't want Hollywood to know
about that, because there was a movie about that called
Spotlight.
Oh, Spotlight, yeah, with Boston and all that. Thank you. They if you notice, because that had been going on,
mm-hmm.
but it wasn't until the Pope and the Catholic Church opposed the Gulf War that suddenly it's all over the news about the pedophile rings and so on.
That's the importance of human compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Because these things are created for a purpose, and that's, I mean, get back to, what was his name? Roy Cohn did that. That was his thing.
Yeah, he was a closet homosexual too.
But he had the goods in everybody. He was a good lawyer because it wasn't because of his legal acumen or skills, because he knew he had the goods on the judges. So good lawyers. And according,
the best lawyer knows the judge. That's what.
Yeah, and according to what's his name, the Gold Shield detective did the Son of Sam investigation. I forget his name. Rothstein, Detective Rothstein. He claimed that Roy Cohn had, Cardinal Spellman compromised. So, and that, you compromise.
Cohn, that's another one of those connections between, because he died of AIDS, I think,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But, he was around for the heyday of Trump in the 80s, and he was the liaison that, pretty much introduced the Trumps to a lot of these organized crime figures that would be in his Atlantic City operation and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And, but Cohn goes back to the Crowns, of course, and, the Warren Commission and all the rest of it. So it's very interesting. And I'm still working on that Kennedy film. I say, look, if you pay for it, I'll do it. But in the meantime, I feel like I have to talk about Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan, because that's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
People are getting killed right now. So even though people are so interested in JFK, I'm like, I know, and so am I, but, my priorities are, let's stop the current crimes first.
Yeah, I mean, you focus, it's called Architects and Profiteers of the War, and in that talk, you specifically target on these people like Larry Franklin and the Office of Special Plans, and how
mm-hmm.
this intelligence was created or cherry picked and kind of stovepiped up the ladder to.
I showed a clip in that talk too of the intelligence analyst, where Walter Jones, I think he was the only Republican there, who Colin Powell's chief of staff thanked him for, he's like, I'm ashamed that you're the only one in my party here to listen to this.
Oh, yeah, Larry Wilkinson, because you have this committee.
Yeah, Lawrence Wilkerson was there,
and all the
Lawrence
Republicans.
Wilkerson really blew the whistle too. When Operation Curveball, well, not Operation, but Curveball from
German
with their sole source about the Prague meeting and everything.
Yeah, that was German intelligence, right?
They said it was Czech.
Oh, was it Czech?
It was the Israelis that said that added the whole anthrax BS to it.
Yeah, but I'm saying, didn't German intelligence say that it's all BS? I might have that wrong.
That cleared it up. Well, yeah. Well, also the college student came forward and admitted what had happened, but there was no meeting in Prague. There was no anthrax, anything like that. But Lawrence Wilkerson and a lot of these and all of the actual analysts are having this congressional hearing. And Walter Jones and some Democrats were there to ask them questions, and they flat out talked about the Office of Special Plans
mm-hmm.
and how they didn't even know it existed until a few months before the war, that they these Jewish partisans had secretly set up an office in the DOD where they're meeting with Israeli generals and cherry picking and fabricating information in order to create a war with Iraq. And all the pre-war lies trace right back to these goobers, and then they would have Ahmed Chalabi, or some Iraqi defector be a source for Judith Miller, who would go and print rhetoric that these PNAC group neocons had already said before. For example, like Robert Kagan and them would write about Saddam's supposed chemical weapons hidden under his palaces, right? They wrote that in 1998. Suddenly, around 2002, they get William Safire and Judith Miller to regurgitate the same story, except this time say, oh, Iraqi defectors told us this. But all they're doing is repeating a lie that they had already told in the 90s that didn't catch on, but post 9/11, it could catch on. And it wasn't any new intelligence or anything. It was just like repeating the garbage they had already said. And just claiming that this time they had different sources. And then you would see Miller, she was one of the worst. She went to jail for 85 days, but she, in one of her lies, had 3 sources. And it was Richard Pearl, Henry Kissinger, and Israeli intelligence. And she's not a dumb lady. Like Judith Miller, pains me to say, but does know a lot about Middle Eastern politics and knew a lot of Al-Qaeda figures' names before they were, household names like Zawahiri and like back during the 93 bombing, which she blamed on Iraq. She knew everyone's name. She knew all the networks. She knew all these players and stuff. So they've been working on this a long time.
So she blamed the World Trade Center bombing 93 on Iraq?
Kind of. What happened was she was on with Charlie Rose, who was another guy who was in trouble. She was on with Charlie Rose.
That's right, yeah.
For an hour. Because back then, like the kids, back in the day, news shows used to talk about stuff for more than 3 minutes.
For an hour,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, so she was on for an hour with, I forgot the other guest they had on, but then they had a man call in, because they had said that she just kept saying elements and vague things like this, and he brought up Iraq, and she just sort of concurred and didn't correct anything and said, yeah, that could be the possibility. And the way it was constructed, it was like, definitely they'd all agreed there was something suspicious about the OKC bombing. It wasn't just Timothy McVeigh, that there was a state power.
Yeah.
And they went over all the reasons why there was some state power and another guy, even though we know it was Andre Strassmeyer, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody comes in piping and saying, well, the most likely thing's Iraq. And they're all like, yeah, shaking their head like, yeah, that's it. So, without saying it herself, she just agrees with someone else who said it. Then she co-authored a book with a woman who said it.
Okay, so not this is World Trade Center. This is the OKC bombing.
No. They talked about the OKC bombing and they were talking about terrorist attacks. So they were talking about the 93 bombing and then OKC because she blamed both on Iraq.
Okay.
So, yeah, that you can just look up Judith Miller on Charlie Rose 93 terrorist or something like that.
And she's also the girlfriend of Louis Libby, right?
Yeah, she was.
Okay.
Leibowitz. She wrote poems to her while she was in prison. So romantic. And talked about the Aspen Institute, where a lot of these people are fellows.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think Paul Nitze was the founder of that. Was the genius that came up with Operation Northwoods.
Paul Nitze,
which McNamara and Kennedy both said was insane and rejected.
Mm-hmm. But he was given the Medal of Freedom by Reagan years later, if I recall. So.
Oh yeah, a lot of these guys went to work for NATO and William Safire got a Presidential Medal of Freedom and a Guardian of Zion award. From Bush Jr. Well, Bush Jr. gave him the Presidential Medal, and then he got a Guardian of Zion award. Like, oh, why? Because of your rhetoric on Iraq. They didn't even try and hide it. I can't believe such an award even exists.
Well, guess me. He had a column. The late William Safire had a column for the longest time. But if you would point that out and say, well, maybe this is skewing your analysis, perhaps that maybe your interest may not be with the aligned with the best interest of the American people, that you might be representing an interest of a foreign power, and he's given a Guardian of Zion award. But this goes to the essential problem you're dealing with here, is that the claims of Zionism and how it relates to the role of the Jewish diaspora is it creates inherent suspicion, because they're instructed to be guardians of Zion, saying them assistants in this stuff. So
yes, and it's a weird, it's an ideology, but unlike other political ideologies, it's got kind of biological roots, at least in the Caitlyn Jenner style, because anybody could just say, I belong to this tribe or whatever, because it's not really scientific. But way before transgenders or any of this, I identify as X, therefore I am, Jewishness has been like that for a very long time, where people could just identify as a Jew, and whether they had any Semitic roots back to Hebrews from the Torah didn't matter. They think of themselves as part of this identity group. So, I mean, they are. I mean, they are if they say they are, if that's what they believe and everything. But it's not just a faith that the real religion isn't about Moses and stuff. The real religion is in this identity of a ethnic state, and that they're on this team because that's their biology, and they have to fight for all of its interests, or so-called. And that's how they think like that. There are a lot of diaspora groups like that. Maybe Irish American is pro-Ireland or whatever. That, why wouldn't they be, But Ireland isn't ethnically cleansing their neighbors and acting like Israel. So
nor is there a powerful espionage spy network, Irish interest suborning American corporations, American government, in taking over entertainment and communications.
Yeah, the last 7 out of 8 Federal Reserve chairmen were not Irish.
So, so I mean, so there's a difference there, and historic. There's been other problems. I think if you look back in the 20th century, the role of, say, the influence of British intelligence and Anglo interest in manipulating the U.S. government, the Anglo.
Well, there's definitely an Anglo syndicate that. Yeah. With BP, had a lot of influence in the early days,
and of course. And it was interesting because Zionism itself has Anglo origins with Palmerston and these things, and Freemasonry. And there's a lot of esoteric, interesting things you can get into there. What's the true meaning of this? The British call themselves the New Zion and these things, and it goes back to Cromwell and the support he got from continental Jews in overthrowing the king and beheading the king and these things. So it goes further back, but. I'm saying this, it's a legitimate, as Americans, or as people who want to have a government that represents them, or at least follows policies that are decent and moral, and in the long term, in the best interest not only of the country but also of humanity. It's legitimate to point out that there's a sort of this, a foreign network manipulating the policies and carrying out policies which are on their face indefensible. And in this case, it happens to be Jewish, and because of the Zionism, because of the criminal networks, the history of how they operate and how these criminal networks operate, Zionist criminal, Jewish criminal networks operate, they're very good at it. But it doesn't mean they should be excused or immunized from criticism. But yet they are, because
of the Holocaust is what happens.
Exactly.
There's such a culture in the U.S., especially of, post-civil rights era and post-World War II, to be, totally against racism, which you should. Racism is dumb. But it goes so far in the wrong direction. But when other groups are racist, when they are engaged in ethnic nepotism, which Israel clearly is, and they believe in supremacy, which we listen to quotes from Israeli prime ministers and the nasty things they've said about Arabs and others, like they clearly are racist, and you're giving them a pass because there's somehow this strange concept that only whites can be racist. And so when other groups act in that same type of behavior, if that's their motivation, then pointing that out suddenly makes you racist. And so Israel's been able to dodge a lot of criticism because of leftist and liberal policies in the United States have such a social environment to where you just can't criticize Jewish supremacy without being accused of anti-Semitism. And no one wants to the risk of being accused of being anti-Semitic because that's like the worst thing possible. It makes you a Nazi. It makes you a racist, which is the most socially unacceptable thing there is in the United States, is to be considered a racist, bigot, xenophobic, sexist. That will get you in more trouble than actual crime. Politicians commit crimes all the time, but say a racial slur and you definitely get fired.
Yep. And
you can kill black people in Africa. You can bomb Mali and Libya, and that's okay, but don't say the N-word. And it's this weird thing that this kind of social taboo on that has more weight than actual policies of murder and war of minorities.
Yeah, people fear ostracism. And, of course, in some countries you actually do go to jail. So, I mean, you can be imprisoned for certain political beliefs or certain novel interpretations of history or practices.
Oh, you got thought crime in Europe of the Holocaust, for example. If you say 5,999,999, you go to prison.
Yes.
And to me, that just I think it makes more people doubt it, because why can't you question it? Just if someone's wrong, let them be wrong. Whatever. You can question any other event in history without going to prison. And a lot of things in history have been revised. If you want to split hairs on how many people died at the Battle of Fredericksburg, not denying that there was a Battle of Fredericksburg, not saying no one died. If you want to say, it was this many instead of this many, you have the freedom to do that. And it doesn't make you like anti North or South or whatever your number is. Like, it just means you think it is what you think it is. But with World War II, you're not allowed to question. It's sacrosanct. And
well, so much of the modern
world. You ask your questions, you get your answers, and you might end up with the same what you were told, but you need to know why, and you need to know how they got the number and how they got this, which should be fine. But in Europe, they've made it an environment where it seems like from the outside that they're just lying about the Holocaust, and they have to imprison people in order to shut them up, because that's what Holocaust deniers will say. They'll say, well, they can't debate us, they just throw us in prison, because that's the only way that, since they say it isn't true, that's the only way they can keep it alive. And they're right. Like, throwing people in jail does make it look like you got something to hide.
Yep. And in your talk, you mentioned this the BDS movement, and there's some it's very important, because we have legislation here in the United States is being proposed. One is the you mentioned the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, and you also have the anti-BDS legislation being proposed. We've had, I think, as many as 30 governors sign resolutions or laws.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous. Well, did you see what happened in Texas there after the hurricane?
Yes. Go ahead, talk about that.
Well, okay, so, California is on fire right now, and they have my sympathy, but a lot of them were saying, Texas is flooding, that's what these red staters get, or whatever. Nasty. But anyway, they had the horrible hurricane. I forget what name it was, because I live in Japan. But
Harvey.
Harvey, okay. Yeah, Harvey hits Texas.
Not Harvey Weinstein, Hurricane Harvey.
The city of Dickerson got hit pretty bad. It was flooding. And so the little mayor there or whatever decided, the governor said, in order to get financial aid, you basically have to swear fealty to Israel, that you'll not boycott Israel, and not, which has nothing to do with the hurricane or anything. Why do what? And I got the news out on that, and I got people in Texas send me copies of what had been written there about Israel and boycotting and so on. A person has the right to boycott whatever they want to boycott, because all you're doing is choosing what you want to buy. And you don't have to buy something if you don't want to, for whatever your reason is.
Mm-hmm.
You know? The BDS doesn't involve the state. It's not like having the state say, we're going to sanction Israel and no one is allowed to buy stuff. BDS is saying, on your own, don't buy anything from Israel. Because if the state says it, then people who want to buy stuff wouldn't be able to. But all BDS is saying is, you shouldn't buy things from Israel because you're helping their apartheid state, and so they're unifying to boycott Israel. So they're trying to make legislation to say you can't boycott Israel. Well, it's really silly to have legislation. By the way, the Texas thing was overturned.
Yeah.
The city council all voted to get rid of those clauses, and they were removed. So that's, they really shot themselves in the foot there because they went way too over the line trying to take advantage of a natural disaster and saying, okay, if you want money, you got to swear fealty to Israel. All that did was turn off everybody in that town who probably didn't think one way or the other about Israel or BDS and didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Now they do, and now they're like, well, I'm not supporting that. They all got woke, so to speak, through them overplaying their hand. But yeah, you've got all these politicians and governors that want money because the governor in Texas got $34 million immediately, and he's running for re-election, and he got it from these Israeli groups. So people who want money will, piss on BDS and try and write legislation about BDS to force you to have to buy from Israel and not be allowed to boycott. The thing is, they can't. You can't make legislation like that. How would you enforce it? Okay, I'm not part of BDS. I just happen to not like that product or that one or that one or that one, and they're all Israeli goods. You can't make people buy something they don't want to buy. I mean, if they decide for moral reasons, whatever, not to buy something, they don't have to. People do that all the time. That's their life choices. Some people won't eat meat. You can't make them eat it. They have a right to boycott those products.
But there's a photograph of Governor Abbott. I think Governor Abbott's the governor of Texas. Abbott's his name. And there's a photograph of him signing this law at the time. And behind him is the Israeli ambassador, the Israeli flag. I mean, really?
Yeah, it was really, really over the top.
Yeah.
It came back, it boomerang too, because they think, okay, I'll just grovel, and that's what worked in the past.
Yeah.
But now, because that wouldn't have been on TV.
There's too much information.
Because of the internet.
Yeah.
Because of the internet, we could be like, here they are groveling. Here's the ambassador behind him. He's got his Israeli flag. He's just kissing the ring to get some money so he can get elected. They buy our politicians. It's totally illegal. They never enforced FARA. Robert Kennedy tried to. Somebody shot him. Mm-hmm. But the internet is really breaking that bubble. And yeah, I talked about BDS.
Yeah, but Ryan, he was shot by a Palestinian Christian.
Oh yeah, on the first anniversary of the 6-Day War too. He supported Palestinian right of return.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And FARA, and gets shot by a Palestinian, along with 5 other people. He shot 13 times
with an 8
out of a gun that held 8 bullets.
You don't believe in miracles?
Well, he was in front of them shooting all these bullets and somehow hit him 3 times in the back.
It might have something to do with...
Of course, the bullet went around the whole circumference of the earth and went around and by the coyotes. Yeah.
Bullets always magic. Bullets always magic when it comes to the Kennedys. So.
Oh yeah. That's another thing I hated about the Oliver Stone film is it spent so much time on this magic bullet and back and to the left. It went up and lit and that, and I'm like, man, the bullet that doesn't matter. Like we know who's pulling the triggers. They just wasted so much time on that. It's kind of like the people who obsess about the physics of 9/11, like the physics of could Oswald get off this many shots and stuff. I'm like, guys, his brain went out the back of his head, so someone shot him from the front. Done. Like same with the physics of 9/11. You can clear that up in seconds. Like we caught a foreign intelligence agency with a false moving company in a van packed with bombs.
Well, there were Middle Eastern guys celebrating.
Trump, right?
Middle East.
The Middle East, all right. Not Muslim, though.
No, they weren't.
And Paul Kurtzberg was sent by the Jewish Agency. Which you're talking about in the beginning of this. The Jewish Agency is the one that sent the Kurtzberg brothers and their cohorts to Dominic Suter, and not only Urban Moving Systems, but White Glove Movers and International Inc. and Max Movers. There are 6 different moving companies that actually they moved a 9/11 hijacker from New Jersey to Florida.
I mean, that's just the patsies and there's all this stuff. Yeah,
a little bit of that's in the new film too, because we were talking about the Jewish Agency, and I just how much I've done on 9/11. So I thought, hey, by the way, let me tell you this nugget, modern thing, but the Jewish Agency was just a terrorist group, government in waiting. I mean, all these prime ministers and stuff come right out of the JA, and so now they operate with intelligence operations. And, everyone focuses on the Mossad, and they're nasty and kill people in hotels and all that. But Israel has several different covert teams that were birthed right out of Haganah. It's real clear, and that story had to be told. So we just made a short little presentation about from 40 to 48. It's only like 15 or 16 minutes long, but it's crammed with information like I tend to do. And there will be a part 2 and part 3 and so on. But
I mean, they have these. They have these networks. They call them SANM, and there's also, I've heard of the Talpiot network.
Yeah, Talpiot's that's just like where they give sort of their best and brightest grants to do R&D. There's nothing really there. There are some people who are freaking out about Talpiot, called it Operation Talpiot. It's not an operation. That's like calling Green Beret an operation. It's just a branch within the military. They do cyber warfare, and it's not a secret.
But but aren't they involved like telecommunications and having this is implication with backdoor technology and things like that?
Yeah, of course they are. But that's they had Converse and InfoSeek, but now it doesn't matter. They get all the NSA's goodies. Snowden blew the whistle on that. Said Israel has everything. The NSA shares everything with the Israelis. So they've completely taken over way more than telecommunications in the United States.
But this whole idea, traditionally the idea was, obviously maintaining secrecy and security has always been a problem. But it was, at the very least, if you have people who identify a loyalty with a particular nation with oaths and things like this, you can have some degree of assurance that people are going to be loyal to their country, right? The problem,
the SANM, like what you've mentioned a couple of times, that I think we should explain, are sort of these people who have a Zionist ideology because of the way they identify with their Jewishness. They feel loyal to the Israeli state, and even though they're Americans, they think of themselves as Jewish Americans, but they think of themselves as Israelis first, not Americans first. German Americans don't do that, or Italian Americans. They think of themselves as Americans, but a lot of these guys and ladies think of themselves like, how can I help the Israelis? Put everything, all of Israel's interests first. And they rely on these people. It's like having automatic sleeper cells all over the country.
Yes.
You can rely on these people to give you information and arms trade, which
it's like the Russian illegal program. Where they have these people that blend in. Now, this is just even more informal than that, because this is almost like they're American in any sense that we think of people as being American, but they have this loyalty, which dates back to this sense that they owe something to the Israeli state because of their Jewishness, because they're Jewish. So they're going to operate in certain ways, at certain degrees, safe houses, or not stopping when they become aware of something. They won't prevent it from happening. Or you can have someone like an Arnon Milchan or something who's involved in transferring trigger technology, right? So it runs the gambit.
Triggers. Well, Netanyahu was involved in that with Heli, and Raphael Adenton worked with Shapiro, and so a lot of SANM, and they, especially if you get a judge or something that's of that ideological ilk, they can do a lot of damage. When you have someone in powerful positions like that, looking the other way for the Israeli state. And it happens all the time.
Or like a U.S. attorney or district attorney or a assistant, right?
Yeah.
Michael Chertoff, right? So, I mean, the problem is it's an obvious problem, and it's almost admitted. But then if you point this out, you're an anti-Semite and you're spreading conspiracy theory. When the network is there, I mean, it's like, of course,
they get busted all the time. Some
Yeah.
of it is conspiracy in the sense that, okay, you've got people covertly working together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all a covert operation is. It's a conspiracy.
It is a conspiracy, exactly.
Every covert operation that's ever been done was a conspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, to the
We
extent
don't know about were too.
to the extent that the CIA wants us to think about conspiracy theory, right? It's crazy paranoia based, guilt by association, these things. But there is.
Well, that's why the crazy things get promoted the heaviest.
Yes.
Because it discredits everything else, and it kind of makes conspiracy as a category become a taboo thing, equivalent of, alien invasion and Elvis is still alive or something, or like anything ever said by Alex Jones. Whereas it shouldn't be taboo at all. Conspiracies happen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In finance and also, just espionage and warfare, and that's all the time. People lie. Our government lies. Our media lies. Criminals lie. Should not be shocking. And they do things that are illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And try and pretend like it isn't them. Their false flags have been a way of just a tactic since the Roman times.
Yeah. And your previous expose on the New York and New Jersey Port Authority, that's a criminal conspiracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Kushner got thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I went over a lot of people who got thrown in jail besides him, and the thing is, the return is so great, they just keep doing it. Because they get out of jail in a couple of years or so.
Yeah, if you're a billionaire, if you could tell, you could, so you'd have to go to prison for a couple of years in a medium security prison, and in return you're a billionaire. Yeah, that's pretty good pay.
Yeah.
I remember I was reading about, it was Hank Greenspun, the editor at Las Vegas, who was involved in the illegal arms shipment during the 40s and 50s into Israel. And he was caught, prosecuted for violating the federal law, the embargo, but he was fined. He didn't go to prison. He was fined $20,000, but he made $500,000 doing it. Cost of doing business.
That's how lobbies work. Even if they spend $1 million, they're going to get tens of millions or hundreds of millions in return. So it's worth it.
It's worth it, yeah. And Arnon Milchan, who got a medal for his espionage, and he's not. He's
a billionaire and the largest arms dealer.
Yeah.
To Israel ever.
And did Mark Rich ever spend a day in jail?
No.
No. And
he was a fugitive for how many years? And and his wife financed Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Denise Rich. Yeah. Yep.
His lawyer was Cheney's chief of staff, who did get disbarred eventually over the Plame affair and the Valerie Plame Joe Wilson thing.
Mm-hmm.
He finally got disbarred, but that's the only real punishment. His sentence got commuted by the president, Louis Libby.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Rich was buddies with Boris Berezovsky and Rupert Murdoch with the whole Russian Sibnev scandal. And, it's like it's all like one big gang. They all overlap, and I get sick of it. I mean, the level of criminality. I just sometimes wish there was a character like the Punisher that would just go around and take them out. The courts are bought, the cops are bought. It just seems impossible. But now and then, some of them get prosecuted. But like I said, it's just in and right out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
And so much money, they don't care.
And they don't emerge from jail broken and financially broken, and they emerge fabulously wealthy. So, I mean, normal people. They go to jail, the wife leaves them, they lose the house, the kids, they're broke, and they're
and you get out and you can't find a job because you have to say, I went to prison.
Yeah. And so, these guys.
Kushner recruits people from prison, white-collar criminals. Oh, how much did you steal? I stole this money.
I like you, kid. I like your style. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the worst place you could put them because they all get in there and compare notes.
Mm-hmm. 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 And again, it is important. I mean, you're focused on the Zionist connection, the ethno-religious connection here, because it is a method of organizing and identifying this ethnic nepotism. We have no problem dealing with it or acknowledging it when it comes to maybe the Italian mafia or even the WASP elite factors into this with the Rockefellers and their Skull and Bones and their machinations and these things. So the Jewish criminals shouldn't be excluded from it just because of they're official victims or something. They should be immune from criticism, and the Jewish people in general, as a political body, should accept the criticism because introspection is an important part of being a human being and being able to deal with people in a constructive and
you
just
gotta
manner.
call a spade. Like the worst thing they can do is call you names. Like I've been called anti-Semite, Holocaust denier, like all this trash, and I don't care anymore. I've crossed that line, and I'm gonna say it like it is. Israel, you're the one that's racist. I mean, you're the one that are colonizing and ethnically cleansing people. You're the Holocausters. I mean, you're the one murdering the Palestinians and Syrians, Iraqis, etc. So fuck you. And people can call me all the names they want. I'm self-employed, so. Well, I'm like, look, I found a way because there's no way I could work in the U.S. because you Google my name and it says all this trash about me that I aren't there to defend myself to say. And so I'm like, okay. And this is why more people don't speak out. And I would say don't get mad at people who don't speak out. They have a lot to lose. There are a lot of consequences.
Yes.
In this business, if you tell it like it is, especially on Israel, like you're going to get called a racist and that kind of bullshit. So there are a lot of consequences, but the guys who are doing it, you owe them, I feel like, a little bit of respect and you owe them, your ear at least because they've risked and sacrificed a lot just to tell you that. And the people have been in the game way longer than me, the Norman Finkelsteins and the Jeff Blankfords and these people that, are gonna, Norman was, pushed out of his college profession. Like, they lose their job. They are ostracized. They're financially.
He had tenure.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
Didn't matter. Recently, Anthony Hall in Canada got into trouble with that too, and apparently he's getting back his salary and his position at the university. But it's another case where a person called all these names just for pointing out much of the obvious problems of, with the historical narratives or some of these.
And the name calling will get you fired, or in Europe, it could get you thrown in prison.
Yeah.
So when people speak out against these things, and they're not a racist, because there are guys that guess sometimes there's both. Some people speak out against it because they really are racist, but when that ain't the case, you should pipe up and defend them and say, I've known this person and listened to them for so many years, and that's not true. Because we can win this, because that's really the only weapon they have. They can't argue with us. They can't debate. They can't argue the facts. All they can do is drag it into a name-calling kind of contest where they smear you with character assassination because they can't actually talk about the topic factually because they're wrong.
Yeah, I was watching what's the Grant Smith's organization, ERMEP? ERMEP, and they had a posting with him, Grant Smith, Phil Giraldi, and some spokesman for Israeli interests. I forget his name, and they're going over the recent Jerusalem decision regarding Donald Trump and the embassy. But they got in just a general discussion regarding Israel, the problem of Israel, U.S. foreign policy, and the problems they present to the idea of U.S. Israel suborning the U.S. government and these things, and pretty much Grant Smith and Phil Giraldi had pretty much eating this guy's lunch. And at the end of the conversation, he accused him of being
Phil Giraldi lost his job at the American Conservative. An article he wrote about it.
Really?
Very recent.
Mm-hmm. Really? That's interesting. I didn't know he lost his job there.
He's working for UNS now. He wrote a thing about how Americans, Jews, drug us into war. It's, kind of a clickbait title, but you read the article and he explains what he's saying.
Is this the article where he said that we reached the point now if someone is commenting on Middle East foreign policy or foreign policy in general, and they are Jewish, that the fact they are Jewish needs to be taken into consideration?
He said that to me in an interview I did with him about the article.
Because I generally agree with. I mean, this situation they've created. I mean, that's a rational response to this idea of the diaspora and the fact that you have a responsibility to support the Jewish state. Obviously, what does that mean? It means that makes every Jewish person a suspect. But who's responsible?
They would do it if it was all Russians and they were favoring Russia in their activities. They would say, "Hey, are you doing this because you're Russian?" Like, it's a pretty reasonable thing.
Yeah.
And they apply that if all these guys in the State Department and DOD were from Iran, and they got us to attack Iran's enemies, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what happened. A bunch of Jewish partisans pushing Israeli interests and lying about Iraq and Syria, who they had written policies and papers about wanting to invade if it would benefit Israel.
Well, I think it was Karen Karatowski when she was talking about the Office of Special Plans, because she witnessed a lot of this at the time, I think. And said they'd be in there and she'd watch all these like Israeli characters, people in Israeli uniforms.
Yeah, go in, sign in, go straight up to Doug Feist's office.
Doug Feist's office.
Karen Karatowski.
Yeah. It was just that
I interviewed her about that. She's from Virginia. She's a nice lady.
Yeah.
She's a lieutenant. And one of her jobs was to follow them in and make sure they signed in, and they would go in pairs, and they didn't sign in about anything, and they knew exactly where they were going, straight up to Doug Feist's office, where a freaking secret office within an office was conducting business with foreigners. And they're all Israeli, and it happens to be, you look at the Defense Policy Board, and they're all Jewish. It's not anti-Semitic to point that out.
I mean, if I were to point out in the run-up to the Second World War, 1940-41, there was an office being operated out of Rockefeller Center, with, a man called Intrepid, that operation. And the British intelligence was in the process of suborning, bribing, and sometimes even killing people who were obstructing FDR's policy to drag America into the war. Would I be considered anti-Anglo, whatever you call it? Someone who hates British people? No, it's a foreign interest that's manipulating U.S. policy. That's aligning with people who maybe either fight for financial reasons or ethnic reasons, identify with this foreign government. And there are tens of millions of other Americans who may not agree with this policy, may not be in their interest to get into another war, but nevertheless, it was a reality. It's what was going on at the time, and then to understand those events, you have to understand that level of intrigue, understand the policies that led up to Pearl Harbor and these things. Same thing today, it's
Pearl Harbor, where they knew it was coming.
Yeah, you
should come to the TILUP conference, the conference on Israeli influence in the United States. It's March 2nd, and you're in Virginia, aren't you? Or are you still in Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, not that far to D.C. then. I'm going down there again, I think the fourth time? I don't remember. I think this is my fifth one in a row. Grant Smith will be there. Geraldine C. and I and all of them are around D.C. Allison Weir, I've seen her there.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Nader usually comes. I don't know who the speakers are this year yet, but I think you'd really enjoy that, and we got a crew of people. This really needs more media exposure, and it needs to get out there, because this is the concrete work, going against the guys at the real top, the lobbyists, AIPAC, and the whole umbrella network of Jewish agents that they oversee. Because without that bribery, it's really not in America's interest to serve the apartheid state at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what has to break.